Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi alladhi wa kafa. Wassalatu wassalamu ala man la nabiyya ba'dahu. Amma ba'du. Qala Allah ta'ala fil Qur'an al-Majid wal Furqan al-Hamid. كذلك يطبع الله على كل قلب متكبر جبار. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم العظمة إزاري والكبرياء ردائي فمن نازعني فيهما قسمته. Alhamdulillah. Today is actually the 9th lecture, which is point number 8, which is pride and takabbur. So we're having 10 points, but the first lecture was actually an introduction to Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayh, and thereafter it's going to be 10 different illnesses that annihilate and destroy a person spiritually. So the eighth point today is takabbur. Takabbur is something which is very subtle, but inside the Quran and Hadith, the wa'id and the punishment for takabbur is great. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he says that the 8th thing that destroys a person spiritually is takabbur. And then he cites a Quranic verse. He says, كَذَلِكَ يَطْبَعُ اللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ قَلْبِ مُتَكَبِّرٍ جَبَّارٍ. That in this way Allah Almighty seals the heart of every proud and oppressive person. That his heart becomes sealed, goodness cannot enter it. Allah Almighty says in another verse, فَبِئْسَ مَثْوَى الْمُتَكَبِّرِينَ. That how terrible is the abode of those who are proud. Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam also mentions that Allah Almighty says that might and greatness is my lower garment. Wal kibriya'u ridai, and pride is my upper cloak. فَمَنْ نَازَنِعِي فِيهِمَا. Whoever contends me, whoever contends in these two things with me, qasamtuhu, I shall break him. Yani might and being great is Allah's lower garment, and pride is Allah's upper garment. These are metaphors. Whoever argues with me, whoever contends against me in claiming this, he tries to be proud and he tries to be mighty, qasamtu, that Allah Almighty says he shall break him. Allah Almighty, Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, a very important hadith, لا يدخل الجنة من كان في قلبي مثقال ذرة من خردل من كبر. That the person in whose heart is a particle of pride, just a small iota and particle of pride, shall not enter paradise. I mean, from this hadith, we understand the importance. Some of the ulama have said that purification of the heart from all spiritual illnesses is wajib and compulsory on every single individual. In another hadith, Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, and he explains and he says, يُحْشَرُوا الْجَبَّارُونَ وَالْمُتَكَبِّرُونَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. That the people who are oppressive and the people who are proud shall be gathered on the day of judgment. فِي صُوَرِ الدُّرِّ, like small particles, they shall be brought. يَتَعَوْهُمُ النَّاسِ, and the people shall walk over them. لِهَوَانِهِمْ عَلَى اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. And why is this punishment for the people on the day of judgment? Because Allah Ta'ala considers these people who are oppressive and these people who are proud to be extremely low in the eyes of Allah Almighty. Nabi Karim sallallahu alaihi wasallam said to Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu, inna fi Jahannam wadiyan, that indeed in Jahannam is a wadi, is a valley, yuqalu lahu habhab, which is called habhab, and it's a right of Allah Almighty to give abode inside there every jabbar, every oppressive person. فَإِيَّاكَ ya Bilal, so be warned, O Bilal, أَن تَكُونَ مِمَّن يَسْكُنُهُ, that you are from those people that live in this valley. Nabi Karim sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made a dua, Allahumma, O Allah, inni a'udhu bika min nafkhatil kibr, that I seek your refuge in the swelling of pride. So likewise, Allah Almighty's Nabi Karim sallallahu time and again in the hadith, he mentions the wa'id about pride. Why is this the reason? We'll come to that in a second. Nabi Karim says in another hadith that Allah Almighty shall not look at the person who drags his clothes because of pride, and they're below his ankles. And then Nabi Karim, in another hadith, he says that the person who is arrogant in himself, وَاخْتَالَ فِي مَشْيَتِهِ, and he walks with a swag or a swagger in his walk, he shall meet Allah Almighty and Allah Almighty shall be angry with him. In another hadith, Allah Almighty's Nabi Karim sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says that forgiveness only increases a person, a slave, in izzat. His honor only increases. When he forgives, sometimes something bad happens to us, and we forgive and we forget. And then the other people, they think, he hasn't got a bottle to stand up for himself. The forgiveness is the route for him to, save his face and get out of this tricky situation without taking retribution. The Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says that the person who forgives, that Allah only increases that person or the slave in izzat, his honor only increases. And a person does not do tawadu, a person is not humble except that Allah Almighty raises him. In another hadith he says, that tuba liman tawada'a fi ghayri maskanatin, that glad tidings for the person who is humble in a situation where humility is not required. He's still humble. Sometimes a great person comes in front of you, you become humble. But then there's an opportunity for you to be humble with a humble person or a simple person. You don't want to show him your might. You could have really overborne this guy. You could have really stood over him, but instead you were humble to this person. So the glad tidings is for this person. When someone is great and strong in front of you, to be humble is very easy. But to be humble in front of someone who's also very meek and soft and gentle and humble, then that's a difficulty. Nabi Karim, Allah Almighty, He revealed to Musa alayhi salam, He says, Innama akbalu salatu man tawada'a li admati. Indeed, I only accept the prayer of the person who does tawadu, who is humble because of my greatness. Walam yata'addam ala khalki. And he does not overbear, or he's not mighty on my creation. And he makes my fear necessary in his heart. وَقَطَعَ النَّهَارِ بِذِكْرِهِ. And he splits the day, he cuts the day, he breaks the day with my zikr. And at times, at the opportune moments, he's in the remembrance of Allah Almighty. وَكَفَّ نَفْسَهُ عَنِ الشَّهَوَاتِ مِنْ أَجْلِ. And he stops himself from all carnal desires because of myself. Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, إِذَا تَوَازَ الْعَبْدُ لِلَّهِ رَفَعَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى إِلَى السَّمَاءِ السَّابِعَةِ. When a person does tawadu, then Allah Almighty, He raises him to the seventh heavens. And in another hadith he says that tawadu, humbleness, does not increase a slave except in raising himself to be close to Allah Almighty. فَتَوَاضَعُوا رَحِمَكُمُ اللَّهُ. Allah Almighty, Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says, He then commands the companions, He says, be humble, may Allah Almighty have mercy upon you. And then He says in another hadith, just the last one, إِنَّهُ لَيَعْجُبَنِي أَن يَحْمِلَ الرَّجُلُ الشَّيْءَ فِي يَدِهِ. It really pleases me. It really pleases me that a person carries something in his hand, like a tool, or he's doing some work. فَيَكُونَ مِحْنَةً لِأَهْلِهِ. And he's doing something to serve his family. He goes into the kitchen, he brings the pots, he brings a spoon, he brings a cup, a jug of water, whatever. Or he's working in the garden, or he's doing something with a car, tinkering around. يَدْفَعُ بِهِ الْكِبَرَ عَنْ نَفْسِهِ. And with this, that the pride, it removes itself from his heart. So Allah Almighty, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, what he does is he mentions time and again, one thing after another, that what pride actually is, and what's the wa'id mentioned inside the Quran and Hadith about pride, and how a detestable thing it is. That even an iota and a particle of pride in a person shall stop him from entering paradise. The ulama says wajib upon him to remove all of this. But what is the reality of pride? What is the definition of pride? That's what the ulama mentioned. And he says that the reality of pride is to see himself above another person in regards to an attribute of perfection. He can write well, so he thinks he's greater than another person. And he feels this in his heart. He might be handsome, so therefore he thinks in this I'm perfect, more perfect than this other person. He feels an inflated pride. He's got more money, so he thinks he's better than another person. He feels an inflated pride and pleasure at the fact that he's greater than the other person. He looks down on the other person. And that's why Nabi Karim Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in a dua, he said, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min nafhat al-kibr. That I pray, I seek your refuge from the inflated pride. So then what happens when a person is proud? Something starts taking place, one thing happens after another. What happens? Number one, he likes to be in a special position. He comes into a majlis, he likes to sit in the more honored and respected place of prominence. He walks in front of others in the road. He says regarding Hazrat Moulana, Shaykh al-Hind Moulana Mahmud al-Hassan rahmatullah alayh, Mahmud Hassan rahmatullah alayh, who was the Shaykh al-Hadith of Darul Deoband up to just after the First World War. Very great alim. He says about him that he used to walk from Darul Deoband to the Khanqa of Moulana Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh every Thursday. Every Thursday he used to walk 23 miles. Yeah, out of humbleness. He had money. He could have traveled by some sort of animal, but he used to walk humbly. When he used to get there, it used to be late at night, and the darban, the person on the door, would have closed the door. So he would pray a few nafal and he could sleep on the door. This is the Shaykh al-Hadith of Darul Deoband at that time. And then he would when they opened the door, they would realize he's sitting there, or he's sleeping there, or he's prayed a few rakats and he's gone to sleep. And he said, why didn't you wake us up? He said, out of humbleness, he said that, I didn't want to knock on the door because I'd disturb the people inside. Shaykhul Hind Rahmatullah Alayh. And then it says about him that Hazrat Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh used to have a special majlis that used to take place about an hour and a half before Jummah. And a lot of the people that would bait to Hazrat Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh would come from the villages, very humble people. And they'd come and take the prime position right at the front, because they want to say, they got time, so they come early. So Shaykhul Hind Rahmatullah Alayh, he would often end up coming late, and he'd sit at the end, at the back, quietly. This is where the shoes would be kept. Just where the door is, where the shoes would be kept. And he'd sit there quietly. He wouldn't ask to come to the front. And then sometimes Moulana Gangohi Rahmatullah Alayh would look up and he'd see him. And he'd say, oh, Mahmud, come and sit at the front. Aage aa jao, Mahmud. Then he'd come and sit at the front. So this was the tawazu and the humility of our akabir. That the pride was removed from them. They didn't care where they sat. They wanted a simple life. They wanted to be unheard of. So he likes to sit in a high place. He likes to walk in front of others. People, he likes an entourage behind him. When others don't initiate salam to him, then he looks at them in a despicable way. Why aren't they doing salam to me first? Why do I have to make salam to them? When people don't fall short in honoring him, what he says, he has to be heard. Not only has to be heard, people have to listen to me. And if they don't listen to me, khalas, I'm not interested. Yeah? So this is another thing that happens when pride takes place. When he's told something, okay, Moulana, or brother, maybe you need to do this. Or maybe, you had your tasbih in your left hand. Adab is that you should have it in your right hand. And your shoes in your left hand. Then he has an excuse for it. He says, I'm left-handed. I'm left-handed, so I find it difficult holding my shoes in my right hand. Astaghfirullah. This happens to people. He becomes harsh when he's taught and advised something. And then when the truth is said to him, then he digs his heels into the ground and he doesn't accept. And he's not ready to accept the truth. And then Imam Ghazali Rahmatullah Alayh, he then says, he looks at people like as if they're donkeys. That's the word he uses. So Imam Ghazali Rahmatullah Alayh, he's mentioned the Quran and Hadith. He's mentioned what happens to people when pride creeps in. And it's a very subtle thing. Then he says, why is it that a person with a particle of a small iota and a small particle of pride in his heart will not enter paradise? What is the reason behind this? So very logically, he goes through things very logically. He mentions 3 reasons. He says, number 1, he's opposing Allah Almighty in that the pride itself, Al-Kibriya, Al-Mutakabbir, is one of the sifat of Allah Almighty, one of the names of Allah Almighty. And that pride is a quality of Allah Almighty. And how can a slave contest? How can he object? Or how can he assume something that Allah Almighty has, that belongs to Allah Almighty, and he wants control over it? Why should he have it? He has no control over his own affairs, let alone the affairs of others, that he wants to take over a sifat of Allah Almighty. So that's the first reason. He's contending with Allah Almighty. Number 2, pride prevents a person from, it makes a person deny the truth, and then he creates disdain for the creation. And he thinks he's not ready to accept. So many people are proud. You tell him something, no, they're not ready to accept. And then he looks down on the other people. So that's the second reason. And then the third reason he gives is that he comes between a person and all the sifat-e-mahmuda, the praiseworthy traits. The proud person cannot love for others what he loves for himself. He's unable to be humble. He can't stop from scoffing, being jealous and anger. He can't swallow his anger. He can't be soft and gentle when advising. And all his illnesses come in one after the other. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says these are the three reasons why pride is something reprehensible and a person needs to take it out. And then he goes on to the cure. He goes on to the cure and he mentions what the cure is. But he divides his cure into two parts. He says there's a general cure, and it's something just general for all types of pride. And there's a specific cure. He says that general cure for pride is that a person should realize and meditate and think about what his asal actually was. Where did he actually begin life from? The reality is that everyone is simply an impure drop of fluid, and his end is a foul corpse. When a person dies, and in between he's carrying dirt and impurity. When a person dies, they don't say, oh, Moulana sahab ko le jao. They don't say that. They said, lash ne le jao. When Yaqub Bhai makes elan, he says, Mayyat ne jo aao. Yeah? They don't say कि Moulana Ismaeel ne jo aao. They say कि Mayyat ne jo aao. Lash tayyar che. That's the conversation that takes place. You're just a piece of wood, like, yeah, foul, disgusting. So let the person think about his beginning, which was a drop of fluid, impure. One of the YouTubers said, I wouldn't even wipe you off the floor if I came across you. That's how impure you are. Astaghfirullah. Yeah? And the end is a body. It's not even a person, it's just a body. He then says that let the person think of the verse of the Quran Kareem in which Allah Almighty says, Kutil al-insanu ma akfara. That destruction to the insan. How unthankful is he? Min ayyi shay'in khalaqa. From what thing did we create him? Min nutfatin khalaqahu faqaddarahu. From a piece of fluid, a drop of fluid, khalaqahu, we created him. He was created, faqaddar, and then his taqdeer was given to him. Thumma sabira yassara, then the path was made easy for him. Thumma matahu, then Allah Almighty gave him death, faqbara, and then he put him in the grave. Think about this verse. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, he then goes into explaining this verse. He says that a person was created from nothing, kal adam, from nothing. He was something that was completely not mentioned. There's nothing more greater than being nothing. He was created from the earth. Then he was created from a dirty drop of fluid. Then he was a clot of blood. And then a piece of flesh. He couldn't see or hear in the womb. He had no life or strength. All of this was created for him. But then he's completely, even then when he came into the earth, what was his situation? He had no life or strength. They brought him up. But at the same time, he is at complete loss. Why? He's always afflicted by some sort of illness and some sort of disease that controls him. He's forced to become ill, even though he doesn't want to become ill. He doesn't have control over it. Pharmacy. He's forced to become hungry, even though he wants to eat. Even though if he doesn't want to eat, he's still forced to become hungry. He's forced to become thirsty. He wants to know some sort of knowledge, but it's not in his grasp. He remains ignorant. He might want to forget some memory, but he still remembers it, and it torments him, and he continues like this throughout his life. There's something that he dislikes, but it benefits him. Something that he wants, but it's harmful for him. Yeah, sometimes certain types of food is harmful for us. We still want it, but we can't eat it. And there's certain types of food that we don't want to eat, but we have to eat it. Certain types of medicine, for example. Every single time of his life, every moment of his life, he's not safeguarded from losing his life, mind, health. And then he dies and is presented to Allah Almighty for reckoning. If he's from the people of the fire, then the dogs and the pigs and the swines are better than him. How can pride, Imam Ghazali then says, how can pride be his lot when he is a slave, he is captive, he is despicable, he has no strength over anything, there's nothing there. And Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi then says that think for a moment over these things. Imam Hassan Basri rahmatullah alayhi, he says he saw a person walking with a swagger. He's walking like as if, the whole world circles around him. And he said, what is this walking for the person in whose stomach there is excrement? Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi then ends this section and he says, how can a person be proud when he washes excretion with his hand twice a day, each day, every day, and he has to do this for the rest of his life? He says, meditate over this. This is your reality, this is your haqiqat. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi, after mentioning the general cure for pride, he then mentions the specific cures for pride. And he divides pride into 4 sections. He says sometimes people are proud due to knowledge. They've got lots of knowledge. They might be proud because they think that they're muttaqi and they have taqwa and they have they carry out lots of acts of worship. And because of the worship that they carry out, those that don't carry out worship, they look down upon them. Or sometimes the pride is because the proudness is because of one's lineage. That, my father, grandfather, this is who they were. They were some noble knights, or they were a sir, or they were great landowners, or they had great businesses, or they were great alims. And then he says that a person might be proud because of his wealth that he has, the money he's got, the beauty that he has, or the fact that people turn towards him. And then he explains the cure for each one, which I'll run through very quickly and very briefly, inshallah. He says that proud due to knowledge. Regarding this, he says that the afat of knowledge, the affliction, the negative affliction that impacts anyone who has great knowledge is proud. Pride comes into him. It's seldom that an alim is free from pride, he says, Imam Ghazali. And this is because he sees himself above others. And he says, Imam Ghazali says that he's surprised that a person with knowledge doesn't humble himself, because knowledge should make a person humble. Because he should recognize his Lord. He should think of the end. And he should realize that Allah is going to use his knowledge against him. Someone might see a jahil and say that perhaps the jahil has disobeyed Allah because of ignorance. But when the person is an alim, or the person has knowledge, then what excuse does he have? Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi mentions a hadith of Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam. He says, يَكُونُ قَوْمٌ يَقْرَؤُونَ الْقُرْآنِ. There shall be a people who shall recite the Qur'an. فَلَا يُجَاوِزُ حَنَاجِرَهُمْ. It shall not pass by their throats. يَقُولُونَ. They shall say, the companion said, no, they shall say, these people shall say, قَدْ قَرَأْنَا الْقُرْآنِ. We recited the Qur'an. فَمَنْ أَقْرَأُ مِنَّا. Who is there who knows the Qur'an greater than us? وَمَنْ أَعْلَمُ مِنَّا. Who is there who knows more than us? ثُمَّ الْتَفَتَ النَّبِي كَرِيمٌ صلى الله عليه وسلم. Then turned and he said, أُولَٰئِكَ مِنْكُمْ أَيُّهَا الْأُمَّةِ. These people are from among you. أُولَٰئِكُمْ وَقُودُ النَّارِ. These people are from the fuel of Jahannam. وَمِنْ هَذَا اشْتَدَّ حَذْرُ السَّلَفِ. Imam Ghazali then says that it's because of this that the Salaf, that the pious predecessors used to warn against pride creeping into a person. وَيَنْبَغِي أَن يَتَذَكَّرَ الْإِنسان. He then says that the people should remember the Sahaba Ridwanullahi al-Ajma'in and how they were. وَمَا مِنْ عَالِمٍ إِلَّا وَيَتَصَوَّرْ أَنْ يَخْتَمُ لِلسُّوءِ. He said no alim, there should be no alim, but he should have the contemplation in his mind. He should think that his end shall come in a bad way. And it could be the case that the jahil his life could end in a positive way. And then he says, كَيْفَ يَكُونُ تَكَبُّرُ مَعَ مَعْرِفَةِ ذَلِكَ. How can a person actually have takabbur when he knows this, that his end could easily be negative? Nabi Kareem sallallahu alayhi wasallam says that on the day of judgment, the alim shall be summoned and brought. فَيُلْقَى فِي النَّارِ. He shall be thrown into Jahannam. فَتَنْدَلِقُ أَقْتَابُهُ. His guts shall spill out. Hazrat Shaykh Rahmatullah mentions this in Fazail A'mal, in Fazail Sadaqat. His guts shall spill out. فَيَدُورُ بِهَا كَمَا يَدُورُ الْحِمَارُ بِالرَّحَى. He says that his guts shall spill out, and then the person shall move and circumambulate. He shall go around he shall wander around his guts in the way that a donkey moves around a mill. فَيَطِيفُ بِهِ أَهْلُ النَّارِ. The people of Jahannam shall come around him, and they shall say, مَالَكَ. What happened to you? فَيَقُولُ. He shall say, كُنْتُ آمِرُ بِالْخَيْرِ. I used to command good, وَلَا آتِيهِ. But I never did myself. وَأَنْهَى عَنِ الشَّرِّ وَآتِيهِ. And I used to prevent people from doing bad, but I did the bad thing myself. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi then says that this is the situation of people. And then he says on this, that the cure for this is let the person focus on the hadith regarding the ulama su, and to an extent that he overcomes his pride. So that's the first thing. When it comes to pride, because prideness, or proud because of his knowledge. The second is pride to one's fear of Allah and acts of worship. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that the worshipper, he prays his 5 times prayer. He comes to the masjid, he performs his hajj, he gives his zakat, he fulfills all the commands of Allah Almighty, and then he feels a pride in himself. He says that some of them are so foolish that they think that other people who do bad to them, when they get afflicted by some difficulty, he thinks it's because of them and because of their piety. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says that the worshipper should in fact be humble. If he sees a fasiq person, a person who is a sinner, then he should perhaps say that there's a positive trait in this person that is hidden due to the sin he commits openly. And that perhaps there's a sin inside me, like hasad and riya, that's very subtle that Allah dislikes, and due to which Allah will not accept my actions. And Allah looks at hearts but not appearances. He then says, Anna rajulan min Bani Israel yaqulu law Khali bin Israel, that there used to be a person from the Bani Israel, the children of Israel, likasrati fasadihi, jalasa ila abidi Bani Israel. He sat down next to an abid, a worshipper from the Bani Israel. And he said, maybe I should sit next to this person because of his barakah, Allah will have mercy upon me. فَقَالَ الْعَابِدْ فِي نَفْسِهِ. Then the abid, the worshipper, the pious person, he said to himself, كَيْفَ يَجْلِسُ مَعِيَ مِثْلُ هَذَا الْفَاسِقِ. How can this sinner sit next to me? وَقَالَ لَهُ قُمْ عَنِّي. Stand and go from me. He said to him, go from here. So Allah Almighty then, He revealed something to the Prophet of that time. And He said, مُرْهُمَا لِيَسْتَعْنَفَ الْعَمَلِ. Tell them both to begin their actions, their pious actions all over again. فَقَدْ غَفَرْتُ لِلْخَلِيِّ. I have forgiven the sinner. وَأَحْبَتْتُ عَمَلَ الْعَابِدِ. And when it comes to the worshipper, I have taken all of his worship away from him. Time to restart it. So what the ulama says, that even the sinner, don't consider him to be a sinner. There might be something good inside them. Consider oneself lower than them. To an extent that the smart ones are very careful about this. One of the mashayikh, he says that when إِذَا حَبَّتْ رِيحٌ عَاصِفٌ وَصَائِكَ, whenever the strong wind came, the storm happened, or lightning appeared, يقول, he would say, مَا يُصِيبُ النَّاسَ كُلَّ ذَلِكَ إِلَّا بِسَبَبِ. He would attribute this to himself, is that people are not afflicted by these difficulties except for me. وَلَوْ مَاتَ عَطَاءٌ لَتَخَلَّصُوا. And he would say, his name was Ata. If Ata was to pass away, then these people would be safeguarded from this. In fact, some of the people on the day of Arafah, the Mashaykh used to say, أَنَا أَرْجُو رَحْمَةً لِجَمِيعٍ لَوْلَا كَوْنِي فِيهِمْ. I hope mercy would appear, mercy would descend for all of these people if it wasn't for me inside them. So Imam Ghazali rahmatullah, he then says, فَانْظُرْ كَمْ بَيْنَ مَنْ يَخْلُصُ الْعَمَلْ وَالْوَرَى ثُمَّ يَخَافُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ. Look and examine at these people. How sincere they were in their actions and their piety, but then they feared over themselves that maybe there's some sin that they're committing. And look at themselves and look at the people on the other side. What do? وَبَيْنَمَا يَتَكَلَّفُ أَعْمَالًا ضَائِلَ لَعَلَّ لَا تَخْلُونَ رِيَا. But the people who actually carry out actions, but then they've got riya, ostentation, show inside them. And then at the same time they act like as if they're doing Allah Almighty a favor. So that's the second thing. The pride over one's fear of Allah and acts of worship. Let him think about himself, that there's something that he's doing inside himself. He should look at himself in a way that he's lower than the other person who's a sinner. Why? Because there might be some good in that person and there might be something hidden inside him. The third reason, lineage. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah says, let him look at his own self. His father was a dirty fluid and his grandfather was soil. There's nothing more dirty than fluid, and there's nothing lower than earth. The one who boasts about his lineage and he boasts about the qualities of others, but let him think about himself, where is he? If your ancestors were wealthy, he says, then how can you boast about people who might be the ash in the fire? And how do you know that they entered paradise? And if your ancestors were pious, he says, then how can you boast about your lineage when they themselves, your ancestors, were not proud about their piety? Their honor was religion, and our religion teaches us not to be proud. So that's a simple contemplation for those people who are proud because of their lineage. And then lastly, he mentions that the pride due to one's wealth beauty and followers, then let these people think that pride over these things, beauty, wealth, is ignorance. They are external qualities, not internal ones. How can someone be arrogant about wealth which could be stolen and taken from him? We see so many examples of people. Today they're rich, tomorrow they're poor. Examples are in front of us. How can someone be arrogant about beauty which can be ruined by illness? Person gets smallpox, his beauty is gone. As a person ages, very quickly the beauty goes. If the beautiful person were to think of the dirt inside them, they will be so astonished they'd forget beautifying themselves. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi then says, if an attractive person were to neglect taking care of his body through bathing and cleaning for a week, he would become nastier than a corpse from bad breath, body odor, the stench of waste, and the grossness of dirt, snot, etc. And then he says, in what sense can a rubbish dump boast about its beauty? And the fact is that the human being in himself, in reality, is a rubbish dump. Look internally. Look at yourself before looking at other people. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi subhanakallah wa bihamdihi.